Welcome back to another episode of Ballroom Chat. I'm your host, Samantha with Love.Live.Dance. Today, I'm joined by Luca Baricchi. He was an amateur Italian national ballroom champion several times over, as well as an amateur Italian national 10 dance champion. In his professional career, he was a two-time professional world ballroom dance champion, as well as a European, UK, and British Open professional champion. He's now the head of the Berichi Institute of Movement and Art, and I got a chance to sit down and chat with him about the Institute, as well as what he means by instinctive perception and the idea of teaching to the individual rather than education as programming. So I hope you enjoy our conversation with Luca Baricchi. Well, thank you, Luca, so much for being a guest on today's podcast.
You're very welcome, Samantha. Thank you.
So I mentioned in the introduction that you have many accolades from your amateur competition career and your professional career as well. For those that maybe don't know your history or your dance journey, how did your entry into the ballroom dance world start? And kind of what is the quick version of how we got to today with the opening of the Institute?
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course, it's a long story. I'm going to try and give a short recap of it, yes. Dancing when I was 9 years old. My parents are teachers, and so they introduced me to the dancing world. And originally, actually, I was not interested. But then I remember going to watch a show from our school. And there was this... Of course, I was 9 years old, yes? And so there was this, 8 years old girl, and which looked very cute. And so I remember going to my father after this show, and I only attended, I only watched, yeah? And I went to my father and I said, look, if I can dance with this girl, I am ready for that. So, of course, we were all children, so it was very easy to arrange that. So I started to dance. Then I believe after 2 or 3 months, actually this girl stopped, I guess for school reasons but I had started. So then when I do something, I like to do it well. So I got into it, and then I just kept going, and I was successful at a very young age. I think after about 1 year or 1 year in my class, I was kind of successful, and then it went on, and so it just became what I did. Then I like to learn, so I like to study, I like to develop. I like the fact that dancing is very much about self-discoveries, so I think that attracted me to continue. Then at the age of about 15, I was then first introduced to England, obviously where the best teachers were at the time. I started to travel to England with the support, of course, of my parents. I used to spend 2 weeks in London, 2 weeks in Italy, and so on every month. And then around the age of 18, 19, I then moved, or 20, I then moved to actually London. And that's where really my career had a huge, so until then I was doing well, I was champion in Italy. I was maybe in semi-final of the major competitions in the amateurs, international competitions. But then when I moved to London and I changed partner, that's when within a year I was in the final of the professional. So at a very young age, I turned professional, and under the guidance of my teacher then, which suggested to me to actually skip a generation. I kind of moved into the professional about 10 years earlier than usually it's done. And under the guidance of my teacher, my teacher said, just forget those, just why don't you just go? He saw obviously the potential. For me, it was very difficult to see that I had any opportunity in the professional at that time. But I trusted him, so I turned pro. And then within 1 year, 1.5 years, I was in the final of the professional in all the international competitions. So British Open, international, and so on. So that was my big leap. So there was a big transformation in my career. And then within a year after that, again, I was number 2 in the world. So it was a slightly unusual career, going from, of course, doing well, but more nationally, reasonably well internationally, to then leaping into, a huge transformation. So that was exciting time for me, of course, very surprising, but very exciting time. Then I retired very young also. I did everything very early. So then professional very young, I also then retired very young. And then, of course, I wanted to share. I feel I have a lot of knowledge. I like to study. So all through my career, I always looked for more than just dancing formations. So when I retired, then of course I was very excited to share my knowledge. And that's why now we are here, right? After, of course, many more years, right? I think this year will be 20 years since I retired. I mean, time goes super fast, right? I retired in 2001. So this is going to be 20 years since retirement. And in these 20 years, of course, I continue to study, continue to develop the educational approach to movement. And then came with the idea of developing an institute to build a community. And this is really where we are now in the process.
Excellent.
Was that short enough?
That was perfect. No, a lot to dive in there. So looking back, do you think it was the right decision to turn professional so young? And would you encourage others in a similar skill set, if they have reached a lot of success in amateur at 18, 19, 20, to go ahead and make the switch to professional? Or looking back, do you think that no, you could have used a couple extra years in amateur just to mature a little bit more before moving into the professional category?
I think the key factor is to have the right person to you, which can guide you to make the decision. Because for me, when I first moved to London, and then decided to turn pro. So in that period, when I was looking at the professional, and to me, they were like gods. So for me, it was just impossible to compare myself to them. And with my partner, we clicked, worked, it felt that it could develop with my partner. And for me, my vision was, okay, now maybe I can make the final in the amateur, in the Open or in the international competitions. So that was my vision, right? I had a short vision because that's all I thought my potential could do. I at that point, I didn't even think that I would ever maybe turn professional, because, as I said, these were like gods. So for me, they were just too far. But I was fortunate to always have the mentality, maybe because I grew up with my parents and as my teachers. So I always trusted one teacher. So I never went to so many teachers and so many opinions, but I found the one that I trusted, and we worked very good together. So when I moved to London, well, before actually I moved to London, there was a transition between my parents being my teachers to Hans Laxo. He was at the time actually number 2 in the professional, from Denmark, but also living in London. And he saw potential in me. So when I was going to London, those 2 weeks, 2 weeks in London, 2 weeks in Italy, he told me, he said, look, you have potential, okay, but if you're going to start to have lessons with many teachers, you're just going to get confused. So if you want, I can help you. But you have to take lessons with me only until I tell you that you're ready. And then I will guide you to which teacher can help you then to continue your process. Mm-hmm. Because I came from that mentality of my parents being my teachers, and therefore there was a trust. I felt I could trust him. I didn't know him very well, but I thought, this is somebody famous that is interested in me, and I am a nobody. So I took that opportunity. I trusted it. So, and it was Hans that suggested to me to turn professional. So I would have not been able to see it on my own. You know, I would have continued maybe to stay in the amateur for another 3, 4, 5 years and then turn professional possibly later on. Was it the right decision? I think so. You know, because amateur at the end is only a stage, right? It's a stage to develop to then face the professionals. And at that time, the gap actually between amateur and professional was greater. Yeah, now the gap is less obvious. Yeah. But by trusting him and him pushing me into a different environment, right? The whole environment affected me also, right? Now being on the floor with great dancers, that energy kind of affected me too. Yeah. And then, so I think it was the right decision for sure. I don't think it would have just delayed my success if I had stayed in the amateur. Sure, I would have been maybe successful in the amateurs. Maybe I could say, okay, I was finalist in the British Open in amateur, which I never was, right? But at the end, that's not making a big difference. Yeah. So I think it was the correct decision. And to couples, I think it's difficult for the couple to see it, you know, because you are involved in the dancing and you cannot really see. You cannot really realize your potential also, right? It's difficult to recognize your potential. And then if you are too convinced about yourself and you're too arrogant about it, actually that can work against you, right? Because then you're not really putting the work in. So you have to be humble to know that you have to develop. Therefore, it's important to have a person next to you that you trust that can actually guide you, right? To make the decisions at the right time. They can see the big picture, yeah? Because the dancer cannot see the big picture because they're so involved with their own personal development. So I was fortunate to have hands that guided me there. So to the young dancers, I would say, trust a person, you know, that find a person that can really be next to you. Not that tells you what to do, because of course it is the dancer. And as we will talk about the approach of the Institute, this will become more clear. It is not about being controlled by the teacher, but somebody there that can guide you, right? And you can trust, I think is very important.
Well, and that goes back to a theme that I feel like is coming out of season 2 of the podcast, which is the idea of building a team around you that you trust, that knows your goals, and that can work together to get you to that next stage in your career. I think you said something interesting that Hans had passed along to you, which was the idea of not listening to too many voices until you know how to filter through the information. Because I think so often, I imagine, you know, many of my listeners, and I know myself included, have experienced this sense of you work with an instructor that you trust and you believe their knowledge, and then you go to someone else and get conflicting information. And now you're suddenly in a position where you don't know who to listen to. And it's not until you then get out and listen to, you know, 50 different opinions that you can start to sort for yourself what is best for you and your goals and your body and your experience. Can you talk to me a little bit about the mission of the Institute and how that goes with finding your individual voice as a dancer?
Yes. As Institute, we stand for nurturing, inspiring, and empowering. These are our 3 key words. And connecting to actually what you just said, Samantha, is what the Institute stands for is really awakening the talent of each individual dancer. And we are looking at each individual dancer as a unique human being. So as you said, and as you have experienced, as all of us experience in our time, we have a teacher, right? And then we get exposed to more teachers, and then we start to have conflicting opinion. And that can be very confusing. And it takes time. It takes a long time, right, normally to a dancer, to then work out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. That takes years, right? If you are lucky, right? That's why only few become great. Yeah, and I'm not talking about the one that actually even win championship. I'm talking about the two iconic dancers. There's very few, because it becomes a combination of hard work, obviously the talent, but I believe everybody has the talent if they can tap into it. And then it's also part of luck, right? Of you're stumbling into what works for you. Yeah. So it's a very hit and miss kind of process. Now, what we are doing with the Institute, because for me also it was fascinating, the two things were very fascinating to me. One was that later on in my career, when I got exposed to more teachers, and they had different opinions, and sometimes opposite opinion, totally opposite opinion. But when they showed me something, actually they look good doing what they did, right? So I would look at this teacher and he would move and he looked fabulous. And I would think, okay, so this must be the right way. Then I go to another teacher, right? And the other teacher also looks fabulous, but he's explaining something totally opposite. And that was very interesting to me because I was thinking, how come, right? And at the time, of course, I left it as, okay, it's just different styles. Then because I always been a very sensitive dancer, for me it was not so difficult for the way that I liked, because I had to feel good. So I although I worked very hard in my dancing and I would spend hours practicing, so I was very dedicated, but at the end I wanted to feel good. So it was a little bit easier possibly to select which information worked for me and which information didn't work for me. Because if you didn't feel good, right, 1 day, 2 days, but I still couldn't feel it, I would try to look at that information from a different angle. Yeah, because for me, how it felt was very, very important. The other important, very interesting aspect was when I retired from competitions, because I retired at my peak. Retired at 31. I was reigning world champion at the time, evolving dancing in a direction that was quite innovative. And so I thought I knew everything, right? So I, of course, had many students. Until then, see, the generations were different at the time. I was not teaching much when I was competing, because we were generating financial income by doing shows.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a different era. So there was the teaching was not the priority. The priority was our own dancing, and then a lot of performances, a lot of shows. So the teaching was very, very limited. I used to select very few couples that I like and that maybe were close to me and that would help a little. Yeah, but I was very selfish as a dancer because, of course, you have to take care of yourself first. Yeah, you have to develop your own performance. So when I retired, I was very eager to share. So, of course, I had many dancers that then came to me, and that's when frustration started, because then I started to have dancers that were talented and they could do what I was sharing with them. Yeah. And other dancers that no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't get it. Yeah. And that was very frustrating for me because I truly thought, I have the truth, right?
Yeah.
I have the best technology available. How come it's not working? How come you don't get it, right? How come I'm not? I wasn't just blaming them. I was also looking at me and saying, as a teacher, how come I cannot get this information across, right? So it was a very frustrating time for them and for me. So that's what guided me then to go into a different process, which evolved then into what we now define as the instinctive perception, right? Because I was, at that time, I was teaching them what I was doing, how I perceived it. When you are describing these different teachers, right, that have different way of describing things, because they're describing it the way they understood it. They describe it the way their body understood it. And that's why it can actually sound, and not just sound, it's actually totally different, yeah, because you will have a teacher that says, you have to stand on one leg, that, foot to foot is very important. Another teacher that will tell you, it's very important that you're spending time over 2 feet. A teacher that will tell you must move from your back. Another teacher that will tell you, no, move from your pelvic area, and all these kind of things. And they're all correct, right? If they are good dancers, they have found, maybe not totally, their instinctive way of movement, but they found part of it. And therefore, what they teach is correct for their body, for their instinctive movement, but not necessarily for the student. And this is where the luck part comes in, right? Because then if you're lucky to stumble into a teacher that has a similar perception to you, then this teacher can really guide you and you can really develop together. If not, the teacher can actually become a problem, can actually be what stops you, right? Because if you truly trust this teacher, but this teacher has a very different perception from you, as I stated earlier, not because the information is wrong, but the information doesn't work in your perception, right? It can actually really delay your evolution.
So when you're talking about foot to foot or split weight or the idea of moving your pelvis versus moving your spine or your head weight, that really resonates as something that we use commonly when we're teaching or when we're getting coaching. But like you said, if you can find the instructor that speaks your language, it's perfect. And if we find an instructor that's speaking the opposite language, it can be very frustrating. So I want to talk a little bit more about your definition of instinctive perception. Does that go hand in hand with body awareness? Is it more in depth than just the idea of being internally aware of how your body moves? Kind of what do you mean when you say instinctive perception?
Of course, awareness is the key. Yeah. So awareness is the key aspect here. Instinctive perception is we have not actually understood yet why we all grow with very different way of perceiving our body. Obviously, we're individual in our personality, we're individual in the way we look, we're individual in our proportions, but we have not found in our researches and studies, we have not found any connection, let's say, between height and a certain perception, or actually certain personalities fit. So we have found some connection, certain characteristics in the personality that fit with the way the person perceives their body. But it's totally unrelated to height, width, I don't know, age, it's we just don't seem to find any connection there. So it is most likely, at the moment, we assume that it is how children, as babies, right, we learn, first of all, to stand and find our way of interacting with the gravitational pull. And then, right, as a baby, when we start to walk and start to find a way of coordinating our legs, our limbs, our arms to the movement, that is the moment that because nobody's teaching us how to do that, right? Mm-hmm. So at that point, we assume that that's the moment that we instinctively find our way to perceive that, yeah? So we have so far discovered 18 centers in our body, and each individual person uses these 18 centers slightly differently. Yeah. So we have what we actually used to define them as power centers and free centers, but we have renamed. Of course, the method is in process of evolution. We're still studying and evolving, and as we are sharing, we are realizing what works. We're trying to be very specific with the language. Yeah. Communicating with language is never simple in any case. And we're trying to be more and more precise in the choice of words that we're using. So we're actually currently moving away from power centers and free centers and moving to direct centers and indirect centers. So these direct centers affect our balance immediately. So that's why we also used to define them as power centers. And this is where you will have different teachers telling you, move from your hips, or move from your back, from your spine, move from your head, because that's where they find they possibly either they learn a teacher and therefore they're just repeating that, or if they are more evolved dancers, they have found it in their body that it works for them. Yeah. So this means that they are sharing with you where their first direct center is. The point is there's 18 of them.
Okay.
And then we have certain centers indirect. So that affect indirectly our balance, and that can be used therefore to maneuver movement. So, but the key factor is to what we are doing with the Institute and what we're doing with our certified teachers, right? Because we are educating teachers as well to the method, is we are looking at every student individually, right? And we guide the student through their process of awakening. So we come into the interaction with the student, not with a preset idea of, okay, this is how you do it, and this is what works, and this is what the truth is, because there are many truths. Yeah. And then we really go and guide the student to understand where their direct centers are, where their indirect centers are, how they work, and we really guide them through that process of awakening. That's why we define it a process of awakening, right? It's definitely not a programming.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to that point a little bit more. In one of your informational videos that you've put out, you mentioned this idea that traditional education is based on programming. It's rote memorization. It's very formulaic. There's a structure behind it. If we think of our syllabus, right, it's very programmed learning. You learn step A, then you go to learn to step B, learn to step C. Something that I was very fortunate in my general education, not necessarily my dance education, was the idea of the Socratic method, right? The teacher is learning from the students are learning from the teacher, and there's a dialogue back and forth. So it sounds like the direction that we should move with our dance education is bringing more of that in, is asking those questions from our students and empowering our students to give us information about how they're experiencing their dance movement. How do you, as an instructor, go about creating an environment where your student feels like they are allowed to speak up and allowed to have questions?
Mm-hmm. The first introduction to them is always that they are not going to learn anything, but they're going to discover many things. Yeah. So we change the interaction. The first approach is always to make the student not a student, right? But a disciple that is interacting with the master, right? So the master guides the way, shows the path, but then the disciple take that path rather than the relationship of teacher-student. The student is just sitting there waiting to be fed information and to be told by the teacher what is right and what is wrong. Of course, within the method, we have a very clear understanding of how to guide the student. So the responsibility is not just totally given to the student to say, okay, now work out where your 18 centers are. Of course, we have exercises, we have different processes of awakening, proprioception training, and a lot of different tools that we're using in order to help that student very quickly to actually discover how they feel their bodies. Yeah. But we for sure want the student to be fully participating in their evolution, right? So the challenge is my challenge, Daria's challenge, the challenge of our certified teacher is to guide the student to tap into their talent, right? And, I have, this is quite a controversial process, so the establishment is a little bit concerned about it because, of course, it's kind of a revolution. Yeah, not that I intend to do a revolution, but as you know, change is always seen as a revolution. So I also have like famous dancers that visit our institute privately and don't be exposed, don't wish the establishment to know that. And the transformation in these dancers, can be done within 30 minutes, because of course, the more evolved the dancer is, awareness already they have of their body, the moment that they are guiding and allowed to move in the way that it's really instinctive for them, suddenly they become capable of doing incredible things. For younger dancers, and when I say younger, I don't mean necessarily in age, I mean in experience of dancing. Obviously, we have to go through a little bit more of a process also of developing their awareness, of awakening their awareness of self, so that they can start to sense much more what is going on in their body and how they actually like to move. But even in that, in this last 10, 11 months, since pandemic started, and of course, we moved a lot of our educational services online, and we met many new students that actually we never met in person yet, right? Because everything is still online. And even just through that, so without even meeting in person, without being able to physically touch the movement of another person, the transformation of the students, and some are top amateurs, some are top professionals, some are Pro-Am students that have more or less years of experience. Transformation is huge, and it's really inspiring for us, and of course fulfilling for us to see that, because then every student becomes a individual project. So there is no repetition in the information, it's not just, obviously the principle are the principles, but how that principle is perceived and achieved is very unique for each individual. So, so it's a very beautiful, inspiring process to be able to empower the people, to do that.
Yeah, there's a lot that I want to dive a little bit deeper into there. I want to start first with the idea of it being a revolution and some of the pushback that you're experiencing from the establishment. Is that pushback coming from a fear of critical thinking, or because when you change how an individual experiences their body or is aware of their body, then the look and the form changes?
It's the approach that creates the fear, because the result, is, and I will share a story with you to if we have time to confirm that. Everybody wants to see a movement that is organic, because true beauty only comes from a fully organic movement. Organic movement can only come if mind, body, emotion are in harmony during that process. And that can only happen if intuition and instinct are also involved into that, right? So otherwise we see a movement and then we're always left with a question mark, because it may look cosmetically clean, it may look technically correct, but it will still leave certain question marks. It will still leave certain but, good but. The good but is due to the fact that we, as humans, we can perceive that the movement is not pure, is not true, is not total. Can be better or worse. Obviously, if you have six, I judge competition where I had 6 couples on the floor and they were all just cosmetically pretty, but there was no depth. But still you have to choose who is first and who is sixth, because these are the 6 couples that you have to compare in the final. But who you're giving one to doesn't mean that you like that kind of dancing. It's just that it's the best on the floor at that moment in time. So everybody agrees, no matter which belief they have, everybody agrees that something is great when something is great. So when something is truly organic, is inharmonious, and the beauty comes truly from that harmonious totality, everybody agrees. So I'm not trying to create a dancing that is different. Yeah, it's not about changing the dancing, because then also the style must be very much related to the dancer itself, what the dancer wishes to express, right? Very traditional. It can be any kind of expression. This very much depends on what the dancer wishes to express, the artist wishes to express. So the difference and what is felt as a revolution is not there, right? Because in fact, these famous top couples that came and visited, and they continue to visit and continue to be influenced privately, they actually having great success. Yeah. And they're breaking into finals, and that, the result is really changing. So everybody's accepting that because they see the real movement coming. Yeah. Right. What is seen as a threat is the different approach in the education. Mm-hmm. And as you know, in our dancing world, we have a lot of ego. And therefore, these egos, are threatened by the idea that their way is not the only way. Because every teacher, if they are famous teachers, they create their own bubble, right? And within their own bubble, they think that they are invincible and that they are so fantastic. Of course, the Institute is breaking that belief, not because we are denying their greatness, but we are saying this is not the only way. Right? There are many other ways to achieve greatness, right? And this openness of mind to it is rare to find in our dance industry, due to the egos that are very present. Sure. In these human beings. So this is the threat. This is the threat. We are seriously not doing anything against anybody. I am not interested in doing anything against anybody. I have no time to worry about them because we are so into what we are doing, right? And that's what is important to us. We are always open. So that's why we are offering certification. We are open to people, and we have more and more professionals that are interested in learning the method, in understanding what this method is about. And for us, it's great, because our intention is to create a very positive community, because in a way, this is what I experienced as a young dancer. So my big transformation that I mentioned earlier, when I moved from Italy, from going to London 2 weeks at the time, to then moving to actually live in London, the reason for my big transformation was obviously having the right teacher next to me, having a partner that we had similar. Now I realize we had similar perceptions at the time. Yeah, I changed 4 dance partners through my dancing competing times. With this particular partner, it felt easy to dance together. Now I understand that obviously it's because we had similar ways of instinctively moving. But what really made a big difference was the environment. Yeah, because England at the time had, obviously there was no internet, there was no online education or nothing like this, right? So if you wanted to learn, you had to be in London. And so you had all these talented dancers from all over the world coming to London. We would have our lessons, and then we would have our practice, and then we would have our public practice all together in the evening. Yeah, every evening we would meet and we would have this open practice. And then we would stop and talk to each other about what we're discovering, what we are experiencing, what the frustrations are. And it was that environment, it was all that environment that really allowed greatness to appear, right? And that's why from my generation, right, or for the generation I danced in, it wasn't really my generation, but from the generation I danced, quite a few icons came out of that period. And it wasn't because for some reason, we were born with special gifts. It was just because the environment was allowing for the talent to be truly nurtured and inspired. So now I feel, because dancing world has become so international and so spread, right? There is no one center. There are many centers, many areas, and many people doing different things independently. I feel that community is kind of lost. What we are intending to do with the Institute is to build this community. But to do so, we need the involvement of many people. So we are not closing our doors. Our doors are open. And we want like-minded people to participate and to bring also their knowledge and bring their experiences and bring their know-how and their instinctive perception, their instinctive way to the method.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah, and I think, you know, the world is big enough for multiple different perspectives to exist in it, for multiple different teaching methodologies. And I'm thinking about my students as you're going through this information, and I know that there are several students that would take to this idea of internal reflection and internal introspection and experimentation really well, and there are others that would outright object to it because that's not their mindset, that's not their experience. They want the absolute yes or the absolute no and the checkbox and the very structured approach to it. So I think that, you know, the dance world is big enough that many different schools of thought can exist. Going back to the idea.
If I may,
yeah, absolutely.
Interrupt you there. Our approach also adjusts to that. So we have students in the Institute. So not everybody has to come in with, you know, flowers around the head and be super spiritual, right? We have actually people that are coming and they are very intellectual and they want to know the black and white, really. And we can give that, right? We can give that, but we still give it to guide them towards finding their own instinctive way. But that is possibly their instinctive way. So first of all, we bring them to a slight process of recognizing, is it this really how I like to learn? Right? This more process, is it really how I like to do it? Right? Or I do this because I think this is the best way to do it. Yeah. Right? Now, once that differentiation is here, right? If there's and we recognize that, no, actually, this is the best process for this particular student. Then we take that process. So it can be technical and it can be very specific and it can be very precise, still in reference to that particular student, right? But the approach can be very, you know, I have students that take lessons with me. They would take lessons with me every day if I was teaching every day. Yeah, I don't teach online every day because it's quite draining. Yeah. But when I am teaching, right, which is usually 4 days a week, they take lessons every day, right? And they come every lesson with questions, and it's all intellectual questions. But what if I do this, and what happens if I do that? And we go with that process because this is their process. This is the way they can learn the best, right? So we're not against any way of approaching it. We just want to make sure, first of all, that the student recognizes, as I said, if this is truly the way they are born to learn, or think that they have to learn that way because somebody maybe told them, right? Somebody in a previous experience told them, oh, the only way to become great is if you do it this way, right? So that's the first assessment that we have. Once we recognize that actually this is the way they like to do it, fine, you know, we take them through that process. Yeah. So makes sense?
Yes. No, absolutely. I appreciate that clarification. Talking about the idea of online instruction, the last year, I think many of us have found ourselves in a situation where turning online was the best option to keep our students moving forward, to keep our businesses afloat. You mentioned earlier that you've had success working with students online and using this methodology, even without being able to physically connect, do you find that there is a benefit to not being in the room when you're thinking about something like how asking a student how they perceive something, or because it's a partner sport, because it's a physical sport, because we have connection, are you looking forward to a day where you can be back in the studio in person with your students?
I believe both processes are very important. Yeah, because we often, right? So let's say before pandemic, everything was in the studio, everything was done with a partner, right? So if pro-am student will be dancing with the teacher, right? If it's an amateur couple, they will be dancing together, professional will be dancing together. So there's always this desire to share, and therefore this sense of dancing together is more important than really learning about me individually. Yeah, so there's always a struggle. So this actually 10 months of pandemic, or 11 months, has forced everyone to give up on that attachment of relying on, if they are students, pro-am students, for example, on relying on their teacher, right? Because the teacher now is no longer present in the room with them. And for professionals and for amateurs to really spend time to discover themselves. Because at the end, dancing is like any good relationship, right? So the two individuals have to be allowed to be themselves and then find a way to interact together, right? And the more clear it is who you are, right, as a human being, the easier it is for you to relate to the other person. Often when that clarity is not there, then the interaction as a couple also becomes difficult. So in dancing is the same. So this 10 months actually has really motivated dancers to really discover themselves, learn much more about their own personal coordination, right? Again, if we go to talk about instinctive perception, very often the couple have different perceptions within the couple, right? So these differences can help each other.
Right.
Because then, one will try to push the other to move in the same way, yeah, and to try and understand each other, yeah, by talking the same language, right, by saying the same thing, by understanding things in the same way. This need of distancing now from each other actually allowed each individual not to be distracted in the self-discoveries, right, which will mean that they go back and dance together, right? The two human beings that we meet will be much more evolved and much more clear in themselves for who they are, and that will make that sharing much more special and effective. Yeah. So the balance of the two, I feel, is very important. And I mean, for us in the future, it does seem now with vaccines and so on that we may be moving out of this pandemic soon, or at least in the next few months, yes. But we will continue our online education too. It's not something that we will stop doing. Also, first of all, because of course we have students that are, for us now, the benefit is everybody can be very close to us. Yep. Yes, we have students from Israel, we have students from England, we have students obviously from Japan, from China, from Vietnam, from all kinds of different countries, which normally would have to wait for us to either go to them, to our institutes in those countries, or for them to travel to us, right? Now, of course, they can attend student courses that we do twice a week, workshops that we do weekly, so it's much easier for them too. So we're going to continue these services because I feel individual evolution is priority in order for them to really. Now, obviously, the sharing as a couple is the beautiful part, right? That's the beauty of what we do, right? The fact that it's two people that are going to share that. But we need to bring something in order to share it. And often the try to share it becomes a draining for both human beings, and at the end the practice becomes, right, there's nothing left inside because everybody's trying to please the other person, and all this conflict. So I believe this time has actually really helped to develop the individuality, and possibly make dancers aware of how important their individuality is, and how important that they don't lose their individuality when they go back to share it with another person.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking of it from like a relationship standpoint, the metaphors abound. But yeah, you don't want to lose your individuality. You don't want to lose your individual voice when you're working as a couple. Then you want to have your voices amplified and find a shared commonality where you can still be yourself, but also be part of the whole. Talking from an instructor perspective, you mentioned something very interesting, which is that moving into this mindset, every individual is different, and you have to instruct every individual differently according to system and structure and what works for their body. Do you find that the instructors that you are training have a mental hurdle to jump over in order to get to the point where they can do that? Or are the instructors that are signing up for your courses to take your training, they've already been doing something similar? It's just a matter of putting a little bit more information and education behind what they've already been doing in their studios.
Yeah, that's a good question, because actually we had different situations where we had, when we first offered this certification online, because beforehand, of course, we were doing these certifications in person in our institutes, in Hong Kong, Japan, and so on. When we started to do it online, of course, we had people that we never met interested in the certification, that maybe they followed us on the social media, and suddenly they had the opportunity to actually access the information. And we had, in certain cases, a negative effect, or we realized that we cannot immediately introduce them to a certification if they don't know anything, if they've not been exposed to the method, because they are not ready for it. Yeah, so some of them come in and it's just too much as a first approach. So what we normally suggest is for everyone to start, first of all, by looking at our educational material that we have online. We have a lot of educational recordings there that share the method, share part of it, right? At least the first introduction to it, to start to open the mind to it, right? To start to see if they're interested really in the method, right? And start to recognize, start to be introduced to it. And then later access also the certification. Yeah, but there's always a small kind of interview before we allow teachers to then be certified, because they, if we feel that they are not ready, of course we don't reject them, right? But we say, okay, let's first of all do this and that. Let's do a little bit more of preparation before we go to the certification. Because the most successful cases for our certified teachers, those cases are also, they've also taken private lessons for themselves. So they have experienced the method on themselves, on their own skin first, right? So they've experienced it on themselves. They realize as a disciple, right, how that can transform you. And out of that experience, and of course, they can learn more easily how to be the master that then shares, because they know the experience that they have to guide their students through. So again, also for the certified teachers, and with the certification also, we keep in mind the different distinctive perceptions. So who likes to learn how, right? So so there's an openness there to, and it's not an openness just as an openness, there's an organized, obviously, openness. Sure. And different processes that different people should take, different pathways they should take to reach that. But yes, we have experienced for sure, because in the past, obviously, when it was in person, the people that went through certification had already had some journey with us before that, right? And line, as I said, we have experienced, some quite all, and then we said, sure, we can try, but then very soon after that, said, okay, no, this is not working. Let's go through a different process. And now we've developed different processes for this kind of teachers that have never been exposed. So a little bit of exposure, first of all, is necessary.
Well, and because it's a very different methodology, it makes sense that the certification process would be slightly malleable to the individual taking the certification versus something like a syllabus exam where the material is what the material is, and you either know the material or you don't know the material. Something like this, where it's a little bit more fluid, requires a little bit more fluidity in the certification process as well. The last note that I kind of wanted to end on, and then I want to open it up to you if there's anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners, is a question about perception versus reality when we are dancing for judges. You mentioned before that, very often you have 6 dancers in front of you, and it's not who you like, it is what is the best of those 6. So for someone that is listening to the idea of instinctive perception, and listening to the idea, you mentioned you want the whole package, you want to see everything that is coming from the person. That can be a scary concept when you have been taught your entire life to follow the technique and follow the precision and follow the look of the dancers on the floor. So can you talk a little bit more about our fears as dancers and your reality as a judge?
Mm-hmm. If we look at history, in dancing, and we look at all the great dancers that have been successful, and as I said, great dancer doesn't mean just somebody that has won championship, but that goes above that, that becomes a great dancer, and that therefore becomes part of history, and becomes iconic. We have dancers that are iconic that actually never won a world championship. So let's talk about this first, then we can talk about the competitions. What creates the iconic dancer is uniqueness, right? But it's a full expression of that uniqueness. So in communication, right, I also went to study psychology and different kind of aspect, that were all taken into then the method. There are in communication, right, there are the overt messages and the hidden messages, right? So I try to tell you something, but if I am not feeling what I wish to tell you, the hidden messages will tell something totally different.
Right.
And as human beings, we be more on the hidden message than on the actual overt message. So if I see a dancer on the floor that is trying to smile, but I recognize how much tension they have on their body, I don't see the smile, I see the tension. I see the difficulty they have. So, like in anything, we are, as human beings, we are open to accept opinions as long as we feel that those opinions are sincerely shared. So if I truly believe in what I'm saying and all of me is behind what I'm saying, right, the overt message and the hidden messages are all fitting together. Therefore, you will accept what I am saying. You may agree or not agree, that's a different thing, but you will respect what I'm saying because you know that it's sincere. If when I share with you, I'm trying to tell you something that I am not believing in or that I am not experiencing as I'm saying it to you, you will start to see that the hidden messages are telling you other things. At that point, as human beings, we go in protection because we know that this person is kind of lying to us.
Right.
Now, if we bring this to dancing, it's exactly the same thing. So that's why the totality is very important. And that totality doesn't disregard technique, does not disregard history. It announces actually the technique, right? It supports the history of the dance. It supports the development of the true character of the dance. But then it has to be your personal interpretation to that, right? What is your version of that? Yeah. And the important thing is that you are totally into that expression, because then as a judge, you see that and you respect it and you will like it because it's real. And it's only real not because you try to show me something, but because you're experiencing what you're expressing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Now, very rarely now see this on the floor. This is the difficulty of these generations. Yeah. And I hate to speak like this because I sound like an old man, but when I say my times, yeah, you would have at the British Open, for example, in Blackpool, yeah, you would have the couple that was totally switched on in that night, right? And you would have the whole audience, right, supporting this couple going around the floor, you know? I'm getting goosebumps just now talking about it, because I've experienced that as an outsider, right, when I was seeing these guys as gods, right? And I've experienced it, one of those guys, right? And there was so much purity in the commitment to produce the real thing, right? That it would make people cry. It would make people, you know, it would touch the audience, right? So much. And that is what I feel, this desire to be competitive or this desire to please the judges, he's compromising that. Because then it becomes much more of a faking it. The problem is judges are not stupid, right? You know, humans are not stupid. We are not stupid, right? So we are sensitive. We can sense things. We can see when something is real and when something is fake. As I said, when you have 6 couples that are fake and then one of them has to win, right? And I say fake with respectfulness. Yes, I don't mean they are trying to be fake, but they are not total yet in their performance. We still have to choose one couple to put first. Now, what happens is the other dancers look at the marks possibly and they say, oh, this is the couple that is winning. This is the couple that gets all the first. Oh, so I must do the same. Mm-hmm. But it's not necessarily the case, because maybe this couple is just the best of those 6 couples, but is not doing really the real thing. Yeah. Not yet has achieved it, right? So the advice that I can give to competitors, you know, what is important is that your message is delivered clearly. So as a judge, we have to understand what is it that you're trying to do. What are you trying to express, right? No matter what you actually are trying to express, if it's delivered clearly, we will accept it. So if it's half delivered because you're half trying to do it, but half you are trying to please the judge and try to do what you think the judge wants to see, right? Then forget it, because you ask 20 judges and they will tell you 20 different things. You ask 50 judges and they will tell you 50 different things. But at the end, everybody will agree when something is real.
So two thoughts on that. The first is, you know, the benefit of being in the digital age is that we can have coaching with anyone in the world. The access to information is so much better. We can have online lessons. We can listen to lectures. It's all there in front of us. The detriment of being in an online community is everyone can watch the same videos of the same final 6 and watch what the top couple is doing. And then, as you said, take that as an indication of what is good, what has the stamp of approval. If you were put in a position where you have the final 6 in front of you and there are, let's say, 4 dancers that are technically as close to perfect as perfect can be. And you have two couples that you see truth and authenticity and you believe those couples, but maybe their technique is not at the same level as the other four. How do you place them?
Well, we have to define technique, first of all. I understand your question, right? We have to define technique. Technique is not just the execution. See, if we look at the technique book, right? This is a very good question, Samantha, yeah, that you're giving me. Let me see if I can give a clear answer to it. The dance technique is explaining the result of a movement. Not explaining, right? It's describing the result of a movement, right? So it's a right foot forward diagonally to wall, and it's a heel toe, for example, right? But that is the result of what the body has done before that, right? The body has done something before that to create that step. The body has been used in a certain way to create a heel toe. The body has had a certain transverse movement to create the step into a diagonal direction. Now that is the technique. Mm-hmm. So it cannot happen that I have four couples that have perfect technique or near perfect technique, two that are authentic in their movement. Because if you are not authentic in your movement, you cannot have. Now, it can be that you are authentic in your movement and you are expressing and you're so into it and you disregard all the technique, right? This is possible.
Sure.
And we're not promoting that. But I don't want technique to be the artificiality of just copying the correct footwork and because the feet are closing, this is correct technique. Because if the feet, but the body is all tense and I'm not doing anything just because I'm trying to close my feet, this for me is technique. So the correct technique is seen by what the body is doing, right? What is the body doing to achieve then the correct and precise execution and therefore having the technical value of that specific figure. And the only way you can do that is by being authentic through the organic through your movement. Yeah. So technique is not only feet and legs and timing, it's the totality. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can you see from where I'm coming from?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I think that's I very much appreciate how you worded that. Because I think that gives me a greater insight into what we've been talking about this entire time. It's not just what feels good in the body and how do I move, but if I'm doing a natural turn, what do I have to set up before my step through my body in a way that I can reach 1, 2, and 3 in the correct way, in my body, centered with the correct movement pattern and in a way that I can transfer that to my partner. So I think that sums up a lot of what we've been talking about in a very beautiful way.
Right. Because this is how the technique book was written. Mm. It was dancing developed from music, right? There was music first, and then humans felt the need to move to music, right? And then if we relate it to ballroom dancing, for example, that was used as a social way to interact, right? To get to meet people in very beautiful environment with a very sophisticated, refined way of interaction. And then it was much late. There was no technique at the time, right? The dancers learned how to move their body, how to use their bodies, right? Not steps, how to use their bodies. So music was in their body, and then out of their body, right, steps came. Then later on, the top dancers decided to write what they were actually doing. But at that time, it was too complex for them to write what their body was doing. Mm. Right? So they just wrote down the result is right foot forward, diagonally to wall. But what what's happening? I mean, how much is happening before that, for that to happen? Right? So that is the real technique.
Interesting. Yeah.
That is the real technique. And that's why with the Institute, we are not trying to create a way of dancing that is different, It's actually, we're trying to capture the essence, where it comes from. And it comes from music. It comes from music. It comes from movement of the body to that music. And out of that comes the step. That is technique.
Would you agree that it would be, instead of looking at patterns as destinations, it's looking at the space between each step as a journey?
Sure. It's always the process, right? It's the process. That's why, in the method we have, speaking obviously about different centers in our body, about counter rotations through the body, so that we can learn how to use our body, awaken to how we use our body, how our body is designed to move. And immediately after that, we are organizing space, because spatial awareness becomes very important, because once you are aware of your body, then you need to know, clearly sense in which space is your body traveling, right? Is it changing levels? Is it sagittally with a transverse? Is there a column? So there's a very precise process there of understanding that, all designed to achieve a full expression which still fully respects the technique.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't see it as okay, this is the technique and then I have to be expressive. I don't see that as
Yeah. No, I like that.
Yeah.
I'm excited by this concept and this process. Anything else that you would like to let our listeners know about? Anything that you would like to make sure they understand before looking farther into joining the Institute or taking lessons online with you?
I think what is important is, for, there's been quite a lot of, what is the word I'm looking for? Character assassination towards me, again, due to the reasons that there's a certain fear connected to my name and what I believe in and what we're developing with the Institute. So I just suggest people to, before making up their mind of who I am, meet me first and then make your own mind, rather than listening to what certain people like to say. And the same goes to the method, the same goes to the Institute. If you are interested, if it's something that you see as a possible interest, come and see it for yourself. We are always open to share, and then we don't expect everybody to be in love with it. Maybe they're not ready to be, right? But I would like people to make their own experience rather than listening to others.
Yeah, I like that.
That would be the advice I suggest, because we have incredible knowledge. We are happy to share it. But I would like them to experience it and then see if it is really great. Maybe it's not for them. I am pretty confident that it will be transformed, right? But often that first, because they have heard about, because I hear what people say, about the Institute or about me or about things, and it's sometimes very to me, it doesn't make a difference what people say about me, because I know who I am. But it is disturbing just because it may block, people may create an idea, right? And therefore block the possibility of their evolution. It doesn't change my life. Yeah. So their involvement in it doesn't change my life, but it may change theirs. And to me, it's disturbing when I see that people are now, pushed away because of what they heard that we are doing or that we are, or yeah. So it's just my advice is come and visit and see for yourself. Make your mind up. Maybe you still don't like me. That's fine. I'm absolutely fine with that. I can live with that. But make your own mind up, right?
Yeah.
And come and visit the Institute. Same with the Institute. Come and see what the Institute is like. And then if you like it, great. If you don't like it, that's fine too.
I feel like that's good life advice just across the board is, meet someone before you judge them, experience it before you disregard it. Be a critical thinker, be a free thinker of your own mind. So thank you, Luca, so much for being a guest today on the podcast.
Thank you, Samantha. It's a pleasure to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again to Luca for being a guest on today's podcast. If you are interested in finding out more about the Berichi Institute of Movement and Art or taking a private lesson with Luca to discover instinctive perception for yourself, links for that are in the description box below. As always, I'm Samantha. I'm your host with Love.Live.Dance. You can find our podcast versions of these episodes at ballroomchat.com, and you can find us across social media at Ballroom Chat. If you've not already done so, please do make sure that you hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell for notifications so you get notified every single time we post. As always, stay safe, stay positive, and we hope to see you dancing very soon.